Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your patience as we got organized today. It's like a startup. Sometimes you have to overcome challenges that are presented to you. But I'm happy to be here today. I'm going to introduce myself and give a little overview, and then we're going to get to a really interesting panel discussion focusing on the life cycle of a company and a really interesting manufacturing company in a rural area of the country. So our goal here is to try to poke into what it takes to help companies be successful, both on the funding side, for innovative companies, on the IP side, the intellectual property side, and we're going to bring you along with us on that tour. So to really explore that innovation life cycle, the key players, and I'll talk a little bit about the current state of intellectual property and the Patent and Trademark Office. My name is Dana Calarulli. I'm the Director of the Office of Governmental Affairs at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. I've been there since about 2009 and watched a lot of changes that have happened in the system. Changes, hopefully, that have been to increase the access to the intellectual property system, increase the value of the rights that we're issuing. We've spent quite a lot of time on speeding up our own process as well to get those rights out into the marketplace so they can be useful. For more than 200 years, the basic role of the PTO has remained the same as it's derived from the Constitution. And that's to promote the progress of science and the useful arts by securing for a limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive rights to their respective writings and discoveries. Our mission has been to ensure that IP contributes to a strong economy. And again, the only way that it can do so is if it actually accomplishes some of the things I mentioned just earlier, kind of speeds the market, but quality right, and making sure that for those that are seeking rights, it's accessible and they know how to navigate what can be sometimes a daunting and complex process. I wanted to highlight that today is another anniversary. It's the 173rd anniversary of the issuance of a patent to Charles Goodyear for the vulcanized rubber. He was a American self-taught chemist and manufacturing engineer. He ended up not benefiting as much from his patents, unlike other inventors, but the disclosure in his patent opened up brand new industries. And so we can, tonight when you go home, raise a glass to Charles Goodyear, and we could all celebrate his birthday. I wanted to let me say a couple more things. We found a great Thomas Edison, another great inventor that we look towards, had a great quote that I think is very relevant for today. He said in one of his personal reflections, "A great invention which facilitates commerce enriches a country just as much as the discovery of vast hoards of gold." So what does that mean? What that means is that a great discovery can open up brand new markets. It can build markets. And oftentimes that discovery happens at a very, very small level and with entrepreneurs trying to build very, very small companies. So to the extent that the PTO, you'll hear quite a bit from the SBA, can build resources to help those companies be successful wherever they are in the country, access to federal resources, and create jobs. They're going to be a successful company that's going to contribute to the economy and really enrich innovation in the U.S., the economy in the U.S., and certainly create a market that's used by the world over. So let me talk about, I'm going to do a couple slides here before we get to the panel to just give you a little snapshot of the Patent and Trademark Office. And they've all fallen out of their boxes. But today, PTO is, you may not know, is quite a large organization. It's nearly 13,000 employees. About 8,300 of those are patent examiners, about 570 are trademark examiners. We also have post-grant review appeals on the patent side. We also have an appeal board on the trademark side as well, and then a number of support employees as well to get you up to that about 12,000 to 13,000 employees. we receive about 650,000 patents every year. We issue just about half of those. On the trademark side, we receive about 530,000 trademark applications, and issue again about 227,000 registrations. And it's interesting to watch filings year over year as the economy goes up and down. Oftentimes we look at trademarks as a driver for what we might see in terms of applications coming in the door. So primarily PTO is a production environment, and as I often talk, I did this morning, it's all about us doing our job efficiently and getting rights out into the marketplace. We've got employees throughout the country. In the last 5 years, we opened 4 regional offices, but then we also have full-time teleworkers in nearly every state in the country, 47 states, some in Washington, D.C. here, increasingly a number of folks in Puerto Rico as well. And both in those regional offices at headquarters and in many other places around the country, what we try to do is make access to the system a bit easier. So we do very targeted outreach to inventors, to entrepreneurs. We do education sessions on how to start the process if you are having difficulties with the process. We have resources to help you figure out what your next step is. In the last couple of years, as a result of the 2011 America's Invents Act, we helped to create pro bono programs that serve every state in the country. So where we can't necessarily provide legal advice, we help communities pull together their own resources to be able to provide guidance, certainly legal advice, and support for inventors and entrepreneurs that are resource challenged and need some help to get started. And that was our patent pro bono program. So all of this is lots more information on the PTO website. This gives you a sense of the growth. So those of you who are congressional staff here today, there is a program that serves the constituents in your district or your state. In fact, many programs. I'm going to let Nagesh talk a bit more about the life cycle and the slide, but I want to just hit those couple of highlights before we get going. So let me go on and introduce the panel. So thank you all again for coming. The panel really is going to be focused around Tony, who you're going to meet here in a second, who is the inventor and the small businessman that brought you Emily, which is right up here, and a number of other inventions. And Tony, I'm going to, as we go through the panel, pick your brain on other things that you've created along your career. I know Emily has blown up YouTube quite a bit, lots of great videos, but I know there's many other things that you've developed along your career. So we want to hear a bit about that as we go through. Next on the panel is David Metzger. David's a retired attorney that advised many clients that received assistance from SBA, received SBIR grant as well, and was a former staff director up here on the Hill for one of the committees. So he'll talk to us a little bit about his history and the type of advice that he provided to help companies kind of get over that hump to be successful. And then last in the panel, and just a warning, Nagesh, I'm going to turn to you first, is Nagesh Rao. He's the Chief Technologist and Senior Policy Officer at the Office of Innovation and Technology at SBA. I started out part of my career at SBA before Nagesh was there, and Nagesh was at the PTO before I was at the PTO, so we've kind of switched sides. But let's get right into the panel discussion. And Nagesh, tell us about SBIR today and what you do at SBA.
Sure. Thank you, Dana. And I just thank you again for coming out this morning on a lovely summer day. And a big thanks to Liz and Dana and Paul for inviting me and being part of this esteemed panel. And it's great to see, I don't see them as colleagues, I see them as family. So it's always wonderful to hang out with family and talk about our passions. And I think when it comes to this notion of manufacturing, it's a big deal because this ties in more than to just manufacturing. This ties into a culture of making and a culture of creating and a culture of inventing. And if you really think about the founding of this country, it was a startup. We were founded on this notion of creating this new revolutionary idea of a democracy that was basically a recreation of what the Greeks tried to do, but basically trying to get away from the tyrant King George and basically say we're going to do our own thing. And I think that really spills into the heart of what America is that we are a nation of builders, we're a nation of creators, we're a nation of inventors, and don't forget that, I guess. And so I thank you all for being part of this caucus and for stepping up to the plate and always trying to remind our constituents, the American public of the fact that mantra. And I'm proud to be part of the U.S. Small Business Administration. In my prior life, I used to do startups. I've worked in manufacturing. I've been an entrepreneur, and I've done a lot of different weird things in the past. And so that's why I love guys like Tony Mulligan, because they remind me of he's the guy I aspire to be down the road. And so hopefully down the road, I will aspire to be like him as well. He's also one of our AAA Almost an Invention ambassadors. So getting to the heart of a little bit what we do at SBA, in the U.S. Small Business Administration, with respect to the SBIR CTR programs, how many of you are familiar with that program? Raise your hands. Okay, so most of you are. Those who are not, I'll just give a quick spiel. It is basically an annual set aside from the U.S. federal government's top research and development agencies. So 11 agencies from the federal government participate, the biggest being Department of Defense, the smallest being the Environmental Protection Administration. And then essentially it's a set aside from what is known as their extramural research and development budgets to basically outsource some of the research and development work that their agencies would have to do based on work and protocol and mission directives that Congress sets forth for them to high-tech small businesses or high-tech startups to do that work with this bent on commercialization. So SBIR is basically, it's an innovation fund, but each agency uses a little bit different and is a bit decentralized, but SBA is the agency that oversees it from a policy and programmatic oversight and compliance and basically steering of the 11 cats in the best direction they can be. What's really fascinating about the SBIR program is, and I think what's really fascinating not only about the SBIR program, but another big thing that happened in the 80s as it relates to manufacturing creation and the government's role in de-risking technology development was the Bayh-Dole Act. I think there were two critical things that happened, in my estimation, that happened in 80 and 82 with Bayh-Dole in the 80 and 82 with the authorization and the creation of the SBIR program from an experiment dating back to 77 to basically say, America, we are going to entrust our next generation disruptive innovation and R&D to high-tech small businesses and not-for-profit research institutions, aka universities. And I'll let Dave, dig into that a little bit more as the expert attorney here. But just keep that in mind that there are some critical things that happened that transpired over the last few decades that have led us to that point of where we had that potential, and we still have that potential, but of being a manufacturing prowess. And you have to think about it in the fact that we're currently in the fourth industrial revolution, especially with the dawn of the Internet of Things and democratization of digitalization, digital manufacturing, and all these new waves of technology coming about. They don't come about overnight. I think we get sucked into this belief that Silicon Valley was born overnight. Silicon Valley is an accident that happened 30 plus years ago from the confluence of the private sector and the public sector. The federal government played its role in de-risking and incentivizing that next generation science and technology. I can't tell you, I used to work in the CubeSat game. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Cube satellites, but Planet Labs, or Planet is now what they are. I developed their intellectual property portfolio years ago. Now they're a billion-plus unicorn company. Everyone loves them. They're always in the news. They're pioneering the new generation space game. But what's really funny is that when I talk to those guys in the past and even currently, we joke about the fact that everyone forgot that those satellites didn't just get up there on their own. That technology, that platform, they didn't get up there on its own. That was the government's playing its role with Department of Defense, Air Force, and with NASA, and even NOAA. How many of you know that NOAA has a space program? Yeah, a few of you know. They have their own rocket. It's fascinating.
Big ships and satellites.
And satellites. Well, they're satellites.
Great organization.
But and the critical thing here is that it all comes down to a very simple premise: inventing. You have to invent, you have to create, you have to ideate. And so at SBA, I'm an evangelizer. I'm an advocate. I help with the program managers across 11 agencies on how do we make sure we're ensuring that high-tech small business firms are gaining access to this non-dilutive seed funding for technology de-risking and development. That's the greatest part, is that the government doesn't take an equity stake. We could care less. I was on sabbatical last summer as an Eisenhower Fellow in Vietnam and Sri Lanka, and both governments were trying to create their own version of SBIR, and they were like, why don't you guys take equity? And I go, because don't worry, we'll get the money back in the form of taxes. And they're like, wait, what? And I go, look, this program has deployed over $44 billion since inception. And just scratching the surface, 2 home runs, Qualcomm and Biogen IDEC. Combined market cap of both those companies more than triples the $44 billion that's deployed over the years. And if you think about the countless number of jobs, the number of patents, the number of intellectual development, ideation, the success stories from Symantec to Illumina to even the industry of 3D printing itself lays its origins to federal funding, in particular, the catalyst that got that technology to go from off-the-shelf theoretical into actually commercial application was SBIR. And so on this slide here, if you look at it from phase 0 to phase 3 over the time, and you can have access to it, use it as you like, but it really does plot out over time from a SBIR perspective, and yes, I'm biased from a SBIR perspective, but in any general notion of the life cycle, especially of high-risk, high-reward technology development, SBIR tends to play a pretty crucial role at that point of trying to help bridge the valley of death. Now, a big thing at the end of the day that me and my colleagues and Tony is a testament to that is that sweat equity. That sweat equity and that persistence, and the fact that you're not playing a 1-2 year cycle, you're playing a 5-10 year game. And if you're willing to play that 5-10 year game, the economic returns are just so much more massive.
It's great. And I think evangelist is a really good word for Nagesh. He is a true believer and has been really effective. I also like, Nagesh, that you use the word de-risking the innovation process. And that's really what we're talking about, right? It's trying to reduce that inefficiency from that idea, all that sweat equity that needs to go in, to actually getting something that you can eventually get out to the market. And the slide that Nagesh had was this valley of death. That fundamental research, it's very, very difficult to get funding. And it's very difficult to be able to get to that point where you could even create a job, create a company. Right. Nagesh mentioned the number of jobs created. IP-intensive industries, PTO released a report in the updated report in the last year, 27.9 million jobs created in 2014 alone from IP-intensive industries. So we know that these types of industries that are really trying to create markets and innovate are the real job drivers. Let's jump to David. You want to jump in?
What I'd like to do is just jump in here and kind of set the table for Tony. Sure. and obviously the innovation you see up there, and I'd like to kind of treat Tony as dessert. I think the first thing we want to.
Tony, is that okay with you?
Yeah, is that all right? We do want to pay our respects to the 2 brave police officers yesterday, Capitol Police, that did their job in an exemplary way, and we want to give our sympathy to the victims. One question you might want to ask is, why are we here? Why are we here in the Capitol? Why? And I want to sort of maybe focus you on one aspect that you're hearing and you're going to hear, and that is the innovation continuum. There's a myth, I think, among some, not probably this audience, that once that light bulb goes out, it comes on, and then the next day there's a product. No, that's not the case. There is an innovation continuum that has to occur between that light bulb going out, that idea, you called it ideate, the phase 1 where you submit a proposal and you say, I think that this doesn't violate Newtonian physics, but you'll tell me. And that final product where that firm creates jobs at a furious rate. And we all want to focus on that, but it's the in-between What happens in between? It's called the valley of death. Contrast the innovation firm with the manufacturing firm. There's no revenues during that innovation period, which can last 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, can last a long time. Yes, you have patent protection during that period. That's great. But you don't have revenues. If you have a manufacturing firm, if you have a barber shop, if you have a pizza shop, you have revenues. When you're an innovative small business, you don't have those revenues. And so you are doing research and development. You're doing further development. Then you do further development. Then you do engineering. Then you do testing. Then you do retesting. Then you do more development. You do testing and testing and testing, which itself is kind of the valley of death. And finally, you have a product. And let me tell you, the DoD demands a product because, you know, when that enemy is coming over the hill, you don't want to point your innovation at them and it goes click. So you've got to have something that works. And it's that innovation continuum that is not well understood, and it is that innovation continuum as to why we're here. Because it is Congress that has recognized that need for help. It is Congress that has provided the SBIR program that provides the valuable help to these small innovative firms to get to that point where they can get a product and they can start generating revenues. So that innovation continuum is vital for us to understand. It's not well understood, and we have to understand it.
I think it's a great transition. So Tony, tell us, now we get to the dessert, a little bit of the dessert. Tell us about your company, and then we want to kind of get into what are the things that helped you build the company and be successful. And I know at this point, your company is now at a place where you're about to have incredible growth as well. So tell us about that.
Hi, thanks for all the nice words. I also want to acknowledge my wife who supports me, and it's her birthday today, Lynn, and also my co-inventor, Bob, on this project. I had gone through successful SBIR companies in the past that were located in metropolitan areas, in the field of ceramics and in UAVs, in rapid prototyping. It's kind of interesting, patents that the government funded us for on the SBIR program back in the late 80s, early 90s. We licensed that technology to all the major 3D printers, and now everything that was such a unique invention is just like in people's homes now everywhere. So we got our part of it on the wealth part, so no complaints there. This company we decided to up the ante on our sort of, we call these projects or experiments of putting a high technology business in a rural area. So we're in a small village. It's really a mining town, copper mining. The company started, we had our ideas of what we wanted to do. It started in the open office in the house, so we had a house office. About a year later, we won our first SBIR, a Navy SBIR, and we used the revenues of that to help us sublease some space from another company that was located on the Tohono O'odham Reservation, so a company that I had helped found a number of years earlier. While that phase one was going on, we were able to secure a number of phase 3 projects, long before we even knew whether we would be applying for a phase 2. And the phase 3 projects, through the support of the Department of Commerce, one was to promote our Emily concept, and the other one was a slightly smarter Emily to throw into hurricanes. So we're in the middle of a desert, and we get our first mission to send a pre-Emily boat with a sonar to Mount Everest to monitor the lake to make sure the ice dam won't fail and kill 40,000 villagers. And it was the irony of the story of the company was we build boats in the desert to monitor the lakes at Mount Everest. So it's kind of in a strange way how we do things. But so we knew going to do this in a rural area was going to have huge difficulties. So for example, it's very hard to get investment bankers and venture capitalists to come to the rural area. They don't want to get on a plane. They want to go do a meeting in they want to drive somewhere in 20 or 30 minutes from their office, do their meeting and go back. You tell them, oh, we have to fly to Tucson. Then if you are from Tucson, you have to drive 45 minutes or an hour to our location. And then you do the meeting and you go back. We actually had 2 banks say they liked our financials, they liked our plan, they thought it was great, and they said no because of our location, but if we were to move into the city, they'd love it. So that's one difficulty. Another difficulty is the other high-tech company in our town was the car wash. And so it was high-tech in the sense it was mechanical, but we're a town that has gas stations, we have a couple traffic lights, and we're copper mining. And and right now it's a really bad time because the price of copper is down, and most of the employees are being let go. But there's very limited in the way of hardware shops. There's no machine shops. So you have to send employees into town. Takes an hour for them to go there. Then they spend more time since it's such a long trip. So just errands take hours of productive time away. So there's a number of things like that that are difficult things to overcome. So to summarize, though, things that have been a giant help for us was we're far enough away that Department of Commerce helped us with our export by actually putting somebody in our office for a while instead of us going to visit them because it was such a long trip. That turned out to pave the way for a lot of our technology not being classified as ITAR and for clarification on our EAR 99. So just 6 months after that, half of our company's revenues were from exports. So these exports, so the bonus is they almost always pay you cash up front. So that really helps on the cash flow of an operating company. So one of our rewards was this extra effort got us a little extra help, but Department of Commerce was very instrumental in that. Another one I want to point out is the SBIR program. So you do hear a lot, well, a lot of awards go to Silicon Valley or to Massachusetts. Well, that's because there's a lot of really smart people there to do that technology. Yeah. But the advantage of the SBIR is they don't care when you're applying if you're rural. So they're different than venture capitalists and bankers. They care about, do you have a really good idea? Is your idea competitive? Is your technology sound? Can your company compete with the market? Can you solve the mission problems the federal government has? It doesn't bother them if you're in the middle of nowhere, unlike the bankers. So one thing I do want to point out is this SBIR program is very valuable if we're going to expand and do more technology rurally. The other advantage we had was, which we were concerned in the first couple of years while we were trying to develop this technology of a rescue robot, if we were located in San Diego or Los Angeles or Miami or in a seaport town, on corporate espionage. So what I mean by corporate espionage is if we had a building on the harbor like everyone else is looking for where their cheese is, their next meal, and they're looking in their neighbor's window, like, what are those guys doing? They're hiring your employees, your suppliers. When you sit up here, have other people that they sell to, and they tell those other people, hey, maybe you guys should be building small robot boats, or, like this company we see. So being in the middle of the desert, if anybody comes snooping around, then everyone knows. The mayor calls you and says, "Hey, there's these people that are wearing suits. Are they yours?" So
benefits harder for certainly corporate espionage, lower costs.
Lower costs.
I mean, Tony, as we were kind of going through your background, a couple times I said, "Well, Tony, why don't you just give up at some point and just move closer to the city?" But that wasn't your model. You created a brand new model.
Yeah, and so on one end, all of us hear about, well, here's going to be all these difficulties of the rural part. And so what I'm saying isn't alien to anyone who's trying to do this. But what I want to point out is there's actually these really strong advantages that I think we need to look at, because I think this should be done in a wider array across the country. So our life is better with the avoidance of corporate espionage. So we are way ahead of anybody else who may try to move into our market. The other thing is our suppliers are all local. So, and I've seen this with some other companies we've been mentoring or we've been working with that are rural. When you're a rural company, you tend to pay more consideration when you're designing your technology and your product to use the resources that are nearby, because when you're in LA, it's easy to get anything from anywhere else in the world. But when you're in the middle of this rural area, it's really difficult. So you say, okay, well, can I get the guy who sews boat covers to be my subcontractor for my cover line? So an example of the result of this concept is our boats are mostly sold around the world, but they range from somewhere between 96% and 99.5% completely made in the U.S. So the boat hulls are made on the reservation, the covers are made down the street, all the hardware comes locally. Basically, the two things we have to buy, we buy batteries for $140 from China, the cells, and we assemble them, and we buy the little radio controller for $90 from Malaysia. And that's all we're importing to build a $10,000 product. Everything else is made by people who live rurally or mostly within about a 30 or 40 mile radius of our office. So now the advantage of that is you have a more loyal supplier base for your technology company, because you're racing all the potential competitors. You're racing everybody who's going to try to catch up to you, especially when they see the market growing. When it comes to, since we're an exporter, it doesn't really matter if it takes you 25 hours to go to UAE or Australia if you have to drive another 45 minutes to the airport. So it doesn't hurt that part of the business flow. So there's these strong advantages that come. Another one is rural, you may sometimes have to spend more time training people because you have less of a labor base. But what's really cool is you get people, they stay. And so they don't get sucked away. And you have to pay them good and you take care of them good. But in our case, our margins are high enough to where we can pay better than what the local entities. So you pretty much have the pick of all the people you want to hire from an employment standpoint, but they tend to work really hard and be really committed. So we have very low turnover, and so you don't have to spend time retraining people for the new jobs.
So some unique challenges, certainly, if you're trying to build a business in a rural environment, but some very great benefits on the other side.
Good benefits on the other side.
Can we dig a little deeper back to the SBIR program? So SBIR and then your IP. So Tony, in addition to funding that you've gotten from the SBIR program, talk to us about the process and what other benefits did SBIR, STTR provide your company at that early stage? Other support that you might have needed at that early stage.
So we had actually come up with the inventions doing cost share programs with Department of Commerce's NOAA. So NOAA, a NOAA scientist, was with us when we came up with the idea of the little tiny robot boat. They wanted to take pictures of animals, which became the first Emily rescue boat. And then NOAA said that, hey, let's build a bigger one to go into the eye of a hurricane so they could tell where a hurricane was better when it's coming to the coastline. But it was the Navy and the SBIR program who initially, before we had gelled the idea, it was just way too basic science for the Navy. But then when they saw this working, the Navy said, hey, this actually could be a game changer. This could help with cost of doing missions with low-cost throwaway robots. They worry about sailors falling overboard. 2 sailors fell off this week. And the SBIR program was a vehicle for them to start funding us. So I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but more than half of all phase ones go to somebody who's never won one before. So there's a lot of discussion that, well, it's a rigged thing, and people would say that, well, I used to do a bunch of SBIRs, even though it was a small percentage of what we did. But the one SBIR we wrote and won for phase 1 went to a group of people I never worked with in my life before, because I used to build airplanes or do computer parts or satellite parts. And we had to fight it out tooth and nail against the other people. But so it was a very important catalyst. When that program started, the SBIR also gives you what's called a contract vehicle. And so there was already such a need. We were fortunate that we found some individuals in the government that wanted the technology accelerated faster than the rate than the SBIR would do. And we actually got phase 3 contract vehicles. So the SBIR gives you a competitive win, and it means if somebody in the government needs more of that, they can bypass a huge amount of paperwork, doing the BAAs and the broad agency announcements and solicitation process and a review process.
So Nagesh, 50% of all the SBIR grants, Tony just said, go to folks that have never gotten a grant before. I mean, is that the case? And what do you look for when you're looking to provide grants?
Well, I mean, so we're always looking for new innovation pipelines to tap into. And so it is important to us that, as part of the main goals for the SBIR program is to also tap into new communities, especially the underserved and the socially and economically disadvantaged. So we make great strides towards making sure we're including that notion of inclusive innovations happening. Another thing that Tony mentioned that I think is crucial is that with the intellectual property and the data rights that are developed as a result of the SBIR funding, you keep it. The for-profit small business company gets to keep and retain those rights, and especially on the intellectual property front, that's patents that you keep, and so that's a very useful thing because most folks don't realize that is that you keep the IP. You file for it on your own, and you keep that. And I think what's really makes it really compelling for us with the SBIR program is that it is heavily subscribed. The acceptance rate for phase 1 at the end of the day is, when I last saw the stats, was around, I want to say 15%, around that cap, it was 12 to 15%, and the acceptance rate for a phase 2 for a successful phase 1 is around 25%. So it is heavily subscribed and it's competitive, but if you think about it compared to academic grants in general and whatnot, it's actually a lot better because with academic grants, from NSF and whatnot, that's like only a 2-3% acceptance rate if I last recall. So there are these trade-offs and there are these, pros and cons, and it's weighted variables that you'll be making. But I think the critical thing to keep in mind is that if you're an entrepreneur, and going back to what Tony said as his story is, if you're an entrepreneur looking for access to capital, and you're working in high-tech innovation and that space, the government's a great provider of that access to capital. And it's more than just access to capital, it's access to support resources that usually are low cost, no cost. I mean, Dana was mentioning the Patent Pro Bono program. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that program, but I highly encourage you to learn a little bit more about it because it's a phenomenal program, so much so that I actually, when I came back to government a few years ago, I reached out to Dana and Oleg and Liz and team at USPTO, and I said, how do we get the pro bono program at USPTO to be a support provider for SBIR grantees? And so there is a provision that they made for us that if you're an SBIR awardee, you have access to that pro bono program. And so at our conferences, or even when we do the SBIR Road Tour, USPTO officials will pop out and talk about intellectual property rights and just demystifying the intellectual property process. And what's been great also is that every quarter we do a webinar series program for SBIR awardees on the basics of intellectual property law. And so are we saying that we want these inventors and entrepreneurs and whatnot to just go and create their own patents and whatnot and file it on their own? No. Pro se is a little bit risky, and you want to have a good attorney to help you out with that kind of stuff. But the point is that the USPTO has made great strides, along with SBA, to make sure our counseling support centers of excellence and providers are there so that, you as the entrepreneur who's willing to take that risk has that support center backing you up. You think of it this way. When you work on stuff, you want to get a lot of good, sagacious advice, and you're going to want to weed out the bullshit from, the truth, and you'll have to do a little bit of that on your own. But the point is that they're there to help, and it's free, so you might as well take advantage of it.
Well, and I'll say, I mean, it fits in this whole collection of lots of other supports for small businesses, right? I mean, the SBA has some great retired executives, the SCORE program, between the SBDCs and the locations that they have. PTO has a lot of resources, very specifically on trying to navigate the IP process. So we've made good partners in being able to increase the access and help people navigate. There's a selfish reason SBA does that as well, to the extent that we have applicants that are coming that are more knowledgeable about the system, are putting what they need to in their application in the first iteration. It's going to be an easier ride for them, certainly easier ride for us as well, so there's some efficiency gains as well there. But there's as Nagesh says, there's lots of resources. David?
I'm just going to add something here that might be obvious, but I just want to add it, and that is, Tony was alluding to something that I think is important to remember. Almost all of the SBIR firms that make it to the job sort of creation cycle and start producing jobs are producing jobs in this country. And you don't find SBIR firms exporting their jobs overseas. They stay here. They stay in Tucson. They stay in the States. And that's important to remember. I think that's kind of an important priority right now if you read the newspapers. I think that a couple of things about the advantages of SBIR. I talked about this innovation continuum, and let's talk about what happens when SBIR firms get there. They get there because they're protected. Patents can protect the idea that they have, and data rights, the special data rights provision that's included in SBIR contracts, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, protect the data. Think of it as a software code. When you're drafting software code, it's protected. It's yours. The government can't disclose it. Because it can't disclose it, it can't compete it. So it has to come back to you for your invention. And that's important because you're creating a market for yourself. What is that market? The Air Force asked a question. What did we get for our $4 billion that we spent on SBIR from 2000 to 2013? And the University of Montana Bozeman TechLink answered that question in a study. They went out and talked to 10,000 SBIR firms. And they discovered, now I know your jaw is going to drop when you hear this, but it's true. They discovered, I'm just going to read from my book, that $4 billion over 13 years created $47.9 billion in total economic output nationwide. It produced 218,000 jobs during that period. Now you're all probably saying, okay, yeah, I get it. Those are minimum wage jobs. And, you know, I don't know what those are worth. No, no, sorry. The average wage that was created was approximately $66,000 a year of those 218,000 jobs. There are other economic benefits that TechLink cited, but these SBIR firms, when they hit the product cycle, are huge job creators. And as I said in the book, this is a small economic engine that we just need to figure out how to add more horsepower to.
That basically, for that Air Force study, it's a really good study, and we have it posted on SBIR.gov. That was a 14 to $1 return on investment over that 10-year. And for Navy, they did one for Navy as well, and that actually was a 19 to $1 return on investment. Even better. NASA had a 4 to $1 return on investment. And so it just proves this point that, like, you want to be smart with the dollar, but and this is actually quite a smart program. And what's funny is, let's go into this issue for a second. I know there is this cautious concern about, taxpayer dollars, corporate welfare, this is, blah, blah, blah. It's not. I mean, if you think about the fraud, waste, abuse activities in this program, it's very minimal. The Inspector General did like this study, and they only found like a handful of firms out of like thousands of, like 20,000 plus firms they surveyed. It was like very few. It was like less than 1%. And so, yeah, are you going to have a bad apple? Yeah, there might be a bad apple, but there's like a lot of good bushels of apples too, so don't worry about the bad apple. What is more important is figuring out how do you build on the success and growing it forward. And this is actually probably one of the key components of that secret sauce that's made our country very competitive, so much so that a lot of nations have been trying to replicate and emulate what we do. And I think it comes back down to that simple thing of culture. And I think it comes down to that risk-taking culture and folks like Tony who will step up to the plate and do something. And that's what you want to do, is you want to encourage that risk-taking and encourage that if you do fail fast and move forward on it. Learn from it. Don't sit in your room and go, you do that for a little bit, get it out of your system, and then you go run back out and take that idea and perfect it. And I think just as a side note, I think what's been really interesting is we were talking a lot about the wage and it's white collar jobs and it's even blue collar jobs, and it's creation of new jobs, new ideas, new opportunities. But I think what's really fascinating too is that it's not just science and technology that's playing that role. It's also that incursion of art and design. Means design thinking. If you look at that boat, there's a lot of incorporation of elements of that human-centered design, and that's what Tony did. And that plays its role in trade dress and trademark and design patents. And so it's just, keep that in mind. It is this very big confluence of things, but each plays a really important role in that equation.
Nagesh knows exactly where I'm going. So Tony, I put a couple pictures behind you, and we can flip through a couple of what you brought today in terms of Emily. But I want to focus on what Nagesh just ended on, which is kind of the IP. To talk to us about, you can use particularly Emily as a product, but how did your IP work into building your company? How did that help drive the growth?
Well, our IP was actually the first thing we were working on protecting. So, our concept is to protect the IP and to extend it as long as possible. So we waited to what we thought was the last safe moment to apply for our patent. We were happy to...
Describe what that means. I know what that means. Describe what that means.
Well, one, it means you take really good records of when you first invented it. So the concept of first to invention instead of first to patent, I believe, especially in the case of rural, I believe first to invent is more important than first to apply, personally. It's not, everybody doesn't feel that way. But basically what we wanted to do is we're looking to extend the protection of the patent at the end, and we're not as concerned in the beginning. So in the beginning, it doesn't bother us if somebody is stealing our idea while our patent process is going on, because 14, 15 years from now, if we're doing 2 or 3 or 400 million or $1 billion, we want another year of patent protection on the base patent. So we do have other patents that we will apply for that are improvement patents. We are building a portfolio, but we also combine that with the trademarks. Trademarks are important. So we had our first patent incident was a few years ago, shortly after our patent. So right after our U.S. patent granted, then our foreign patents started granting, our one in Indonesia, South Korea. So we had an infringer there, and we had to actually just almost take it to court, and then we settled it. But the patent process is very important. The other thing I wanted to, without that, then you don't have a way to hold on to when the wealth generation happens. And so we see it as our responsibility that when this gets big and we're employing, we grow to be 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 people, and these jobs, as I said, do pay well. My last SBIR company, the average pay was actually around $84,000 per year. And we were actually located in, I think, the third poorest district of the country. So it is a very powerful thing. But you do have to protect, because it makes a really big difference on year 10 or year 12 or year 13. So it's hard to imagine that. But in the last 30 years of doing this, that's what I've seen over and over and over.
So your model's a bit different, right, than others. There's certainly are companies that go to protect their IP at the earliest point that they can, and they use that as a source of driving funding. You're really looking at the real value proposition at the end of the patent life.
So we believe, yeah, so this ties into our whole concept of the business. It's really expensive to live in a comfortable home in San Francisco or Los Angeles or San Diego. You get a really nice home in the rural community. You buy a 4,000 square foot house for $200,000. Now you combine that with an average salary of $70 or $80 or $90,000. You can have a really nice quality of life and go to vacation in San Francisco. So I don't mean to say bad things about these cities and places that I enjoy also, but we can be very competitive rurally. And at first blush, it's like, oh, well, it's so easy to just jump right in to go to the big city. So I'm this advocate for this concept of the rural. And then when it gets big, it's going to make a huge difference. I don't know that it's going to necessarily be another Silicon Valley, but it's going to create a diverse difference. There's one other thing I wanted to bring up too about an issue at the rural, and that is facilities. So in the city, you can rent a lot of space that's empty for 1/5 of what it costs if you build space and you pay it on a monthly basis with a mortgage or a lease on a build-to-suite. Rural, it's very difficult because there is nothing. So like in our case, when we first subleased space, we were on the Tohono O'odham Reservation because there was nowhere in our town to rent space to open up offices that we could have a lab and the beginning of production. When we went to the next level, we were at high vulnerability to have to go into Tucson and go through our next stages of growth where we could actually rent physical space, 10,000 square foot or 20,000 square foot. So our town was extremely helpful. They said, hey, we'll build ourselves a new police department, we'll build ourselves a new fire department and a new judges' chambers. So it's only a little town, 20,000 people. We were then able to lease the building. So we're actually in the fire department, which is ironic because we sell the fire departments. So we took over the fire department, the police department, and the sheriff and the judges' chambers. And so we have a facility. So now and it's like 14,000 feet. So if we build a brand new facility in our town, we're going to pay top dollar because we have to pay the going construction rates, even though there's a plethora of spaces 30 miles north of us in the city. The plan so in this case, the state and EDA, Department of Commerce, and hopefully in our town, is actually building a tech park. So we can move into that tech park at about the same cost that we would have to pay if we moved into Tucson. Now, we still have the other issues that we have to travel. We're not close to suppliers, but at least we have a big facility. The bottom line is that once we outgrow that facility, we're just going to pay cash for building our new building, our building number 3. So it's the incubation phase that's really valuable. And then the town will have that facility for the next company that hopefully is growing in that. So I guess what I'm saying is overall, in the case of to develop technology and advanced manufacturing where you're actually making things and getting the value added of making it in the rural community, the government is actually very helpful in that regard because the marketplace hasn't yet figured out, the capitalist driving way hasn't figured out that there's a model here that could be very profitable and very long-term. So we see that as we grow to the next level, we're going to be long-term sustainable. We're going to be able to have people that are happy to work for us through their entire career and retire for us. So I've been fortunate. I have a number of employees that have been working for me for over 30 years. And what I would like to see, like in this project, this is a way that people can, I know everyone says, well, the past is gone, but this is a path to where people people could actually work 30 or 40 years in the company as it grows. So rural offers more sustainability and is worth the investment.
Yeah. So I'd like to, in the time we have left, get to some questions. I flashed up, Tony, behind you, one of the articles about Emily. This is my second favorite headline. The other one was "Meet Emily, the lifeguard rescue robot that will make David Hasselhoff obsolete." So all of you for homework tonight have the homework I did last night, which is binge watch lots of YouTube videos about Emily and the things that Tony and his company have created. So with that, I'd love to open it up for questions that you have for the panel. We've talked about a few different things. We've talked about de-risking the innovation lifecycle. We've talked about the benefits of SBIR, the benefits of the IP, and how different companies use it differently. And we've talked about kind of some of the kind of unique challenges of the rural environment. What questions do you all have for the panel?
Actually, so before you do that, 30 seconds, Tony, can you, because this is huge. Can you just take 30 seconds to talk about the overseas, what you were doing? Because with the Syrian refugees and going into Europe and stuff, you were on the front line in the beginning. I remember that story last year on NPR. And I was like, wait, that's Tony.
Yeah, so we built this Emily rescue boat. Based on the information we have, it looks like we're about 300 boats in the world, and we rescue about 1.6 people a day. We were invited to go out with the University of Texas and the Los Angeles County Baywatch chief, the same guys in the new movie. We do a lot of work with them. And they're our technology partner because they're the world's largest lifeguard group. Took us 7-8 days to convince the Hellenic Coast Guard and the Red Cross, people that were doing the rescues of the refugees coming from Turkey to Syria, that they should try our technology. And then the last 2 days of our 10-day funded mission, both the Swiftwater rescue guy from Arizona and the lifeguard chief from LA helped them save over 300 people. And it was just so immediate and so straightforward. So we see this, though, everywhere this little boat goes. Things that are less known, in Mongolia, the South Korean State Department distributed 20 boats that are used in Mongolian flash floods, and we were told in 2 summers, 20 boats saved 500 people during floods. Most places, there's been cases where, like, a guy drowned, he was resuscitated, a lifeguard. He buys some boats. The mayor lets him buy boats after he dies, but which is a normal thing. It's it's not proactive, it's reactive. But where people will bring a boat back to their district, and then on that first 3-day weekend, they rescue 3 or 4 people in the same place where people had died before. So a lot of our boats actually solve the exact problem that they were hoping to solve. We're more popular in other countries because there's less union concerns about, will this take away a job, even though the rescuer who would have jumped in the water is the one who's driving it. And so most people think that's safer. And also other countries don't have as much discretionary budget. So they can't afford to buy large rescue boats or as many helicopters. So this fits in really well with them. So it's
great.
And it's the last thing is it's built basically on 30 years of combined SBIR technologies. So it looks like this cloth thing with a yellow model boat, but the technology is actually like what is used in a satellite or an F-35. So we use aircraft grade carbon composites with nanocarbon platelets. We use ceramics for the pump. It eats rocks like they were butter. So if you use titanium or steel, it doesn't work. Those things explode. The little controller handles 300 amps, but it won't electrocute you. So there's a lot of things hidden inside that are extremely advanced technology.
It's really a very high-tech device. And I thought one of the interesting things is it's a life-saving vehicle, and there's no moving parts on the outside. So as it's saving, it doesn't chew up the person who's trying to save, too.
The little boat, I've seen the little boat rescue people in like 30, 40-foot waves. So it runs in any kind of storm condition. And then the last thing, in Los Angeles, the lifeguard chief tells us that it's not how many hundred people do they save. So the lifeguards there save 14,000, 15,000 people every year. It's the big holiday weekends, 4th of July, Memorial, Labor Day. A lot of people come to the beach, 750,000, a million, who don't really know how to swim or know how to do things, and don't understand the dangers of the rip currents. Now they're very progressive. They use the boats to sort of move people over away from the dangerous areas. And he was telling me a few weeks ago that it's a number more like thousands of rescues that they prevented. So the situation never had to happen, and they never even had to like swim out and rescue somebody because of that.
Interesting. So not making David Hasselhoff obsolete, making him better. Got it.